When my daughter called to cancel our Hawaii vacation, I assumed money was tight, but then her future mother-in-law phoned to thank me for graciously stepping aside due to my health issues that apparently only existed in their alternate reality. I simply said, "Enjoy yourself," and hung up. But what I did next turned their dream getaway into an expensive lesson about lying to the wrong woman. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. You know what they say about assuming. It makes an ass out of you and me. Well, in this case, it just made an ass out of my daughter Amber, though she managed that all on her own without much help from anyone else. It started on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March. I was in my kitchen, making myself a proper lunch. Not the sad desk sandwich I used to eat during my working years, but real food prepared with actual care. When my phone rang with that particular tone that meant family drama was about to crash into my peaceful retirement. "Mom, we need to cancel Hawaii," Amber announced, without so much as a hello. No greeting, no how are you, just straight to disappointing news delivered with all the warmth of a tax audit. Now, I'd been looking forward to this trip for months. At 68, my adventure opportunities don't exactly grow on trees, and the thought of trading my snowy Michigan winter for palm trees and Mai Tais had been keeping me cheerful through the season from hell. We'd planned everything together, or so I thought. 3 weeks of paradise split between Maui and the Big Island, with enough activities to keep us busy and enough downtime to actually enjoy each other's company. "Oh, honey," I said, setting down my coffee cup and trying to sound supportive instead of devastated. "Are you and Derek having money troubles? You know I can help if—" "No, it's not that exactly," she interrupted. And I could hear that particular tone that meant she was about to lie to me but hadn't quite figured out how yet. "It's just complicated. We can't make it work right now." Through the phone, I heard Derek's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Whatever he said made Amber's voice shift into that rushed, guilty pitch that had been her tell since she was 7 years old, and trying to explain why the cat was mysteriously soaking wet. "Listen, Mom, I have to go. Work stuff. We'll figure out another time, okay? Maybe next year when things are less crazy." "Of course, sweetheart, I understand. These things happen. But here's the thing about being a mother for 28 years. You develop a sixth sense about when your child is lying through their teeth. And my maternal lie detector was going off like a smoke alarm in a bacon factory. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for a while, staring out at my neighbor's bird feeder and trying to figure out why a simple vacation cancellation felt like I'd just been punched in the stomach. Amber and Derek both had good jobs. She as a marketing coordinator at some startup that sold overpriced protein powder to people with more money than sense. And he as a software engineer who spent his days making apps that helped other people waste time more efficiently. Sure, weddings are expensive, and they'd been planning theirs for 6 months with the kind of obsessive attention to detail usually reserved for military operations or serial killing. But they'd assured me repeatedly that they had everything under control, even turning down my offers to help with costs because they wanted to do it ourselves and start their marriage on independent footing. Noble sentiments that apparently didn't extend to vacation planning, since I'd been handling most of the Hawaii logistics myself. Amber had been so overwhelmed with wedding preparations that I'd volunteered to take care of the nitty-gritty details. Hotels, restaurants, activities, rental cars. I'd arranged it all, partly because I wanted to contribute something meaningful to the trip, and partly because Amber's idea of planning involved a lot of Pinterest boards and very little actual booking. I spent the evening making a mental list of all the arrangements I'd need to cancel, feeling that familiar mixture of disappointment and maternal guilt that comes when your adult child's problems become your problems. Maybe I could help them financially without making it seem like charity, frame it as an early wedding gift, perhaps, or offer to cover just the hotel costs as a grandmother's contribution to their happiness. Because that's what good mothers do, right? We find ways to solve our children's problems while pretending it was our idea all along, preserving their pride while sacrificing our own dreams on the altar of family harmony. I fell asleep that night planning how to fix everything, completely unaware that the problem wasn't what I thought it was, and the solution was going to be far more satisfying than anything I could have imagined. The next few days passed quietly enough. I started making the necessary phone calls to cancel reservations. feeling like a librarian systematically checking out books that would never be read. Hawaiian Airlines was understanding about the flight cancellations, though they kept 20% as a penalty fee. Apparently, even airlines know that family drama is expensive. I was just finishing my Saturday morning coffee and contemplating whether to start my spring cleaning early when my phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number with a Michigan area code. "Haley, this is Patricia, Derek's mother." I recognized the voice immediately. Patricia Chen Patterson. She'd hyphenated after her divorce because apparently removing her ex-husband completely would have been too definitive. Was one of those women who managed to be simultaneously sweet and terrifying. We'd met exactly twice during wedding planning events, where she demonstrated an impressive ability to take charge of every conversation while making it seem like everyone else's idea. "Hello, Patricia. How are you?" "Oh, I'm absolutely wonderful. Actually, I'm calling to thank you." I frowned, setting down my coffee cup with the kind of care you use when you suspect the ground beneath you might be shifting. "Thank me for what?" "For being so understanding about the Hawaii situation, of course. Derek told me how gracious you were about stepping aside because of your health concerns. I really appreciate you giving up your spot so I could go instead." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. For a moment, I couldn't process what she'd said. My brain seemed to be moving through molasses, trying to make sense of concepts that didn't fit together. Stepping aside? Health concerns? My spot? "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "What did you say?" "Your health issues," Patricia continued with the kind of sympathetic voice people use when discussing terminal diagnoses. "Derek explained how you've been having those dizzy spells and your doctor advised against flying. It must be so disappointing, but at your age, it's better to be safe than sorry, don't you think?" My age. Dizzy spells. Doctor's orders. Each lie landed with surgical precision, and I found myself marveling at their creativity. I'd been many things in my 68 years, tired, stressed, occasionally overwhelmed by the sheer stupidity of the modern world, but dizzy had never been one of them. In fact, my last physical had been so boring that my doctor had actually apologized for not finding anything wrong with me. "When Derek asked if I'd like to take your place," Patricia bubbled on, "I was absolutely thrilled but also concerned about you. Are you getting proper medical attention? Have you considered seeing a specialist?" Through my kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Henderson working in her garden. She was 73, had just returned from a cruise to Alaska, and was currently wrestling with a particularly stubborn rosebush. No dizzy spells, no doctor's orders, no concerned children fabricating medical conditions to exclude her from family activities. "Haley, are you there? Are you feeling all right?" "Yes," I managed, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. "I'm here. I just wanted you to know how grateful I am for this opportunity. The resort looks absolutely stunning online. Those overwater bungalows and the dinner reservations Derek made sound incredible. That sunset cruise and the snorkeling tour, and oh my goodness. The spa treatments you'd arranged sound like pure heaven. Spa treatments I'd arranged. Dinner reservations I'd made. Tours I'd booked. All with my credit card, using my name as the primary contact. Because helpful mothers don't ask their financially stressed children to front money for family vacations. "Well," I said, still amazed at my own calm, "I hope you have a wonderful time." "Oh, we absolutely will. Derek's been planning this for months, apparently. He's thought of everything, even arranged for us to stay in one of those premium suites with the private beach access. He really knows how to spoil his mother." "He certainly does," I thought, especially when someone else is paying for it. "Patricia, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. When exactly did Derek mention my health problems to you?" There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear the wheels turning. "Oh, it was, well, recently. Within the last week or so." "Why?" "I'm just curious about the timeline. You see, I haven't been to a doctor in months, and I certainly haven't had any dizzy spells or received any advice against flying." Another pause, longer this time. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had lost some of its cheerful confidence. "Well, I'm sure Derek knows what he's talking about. He's always been very attentive to family health matters." "I'm sure he has. Enjoy your vacation, Patricia." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum and watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes earlier. But something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of reality. I wasn't hurt. That was the strange part. I'd moved beyond hurt into something cleaner and more focused. I was fascinated, in the way you might be fascinated by a particularly elaborate magic trick, trying to figure out exactly how the illusion worked. They'd planned this. Not a last-minute change of heart, not a financial crisis, not a scheduling conflict. They deliberately constructed an elaborate lie to exclude me from a vacation I'd organized and paid for, then felt comfortable enough about their deception to have Derek's mother call and thank me for my gracious understanding of a medical condition that existed only in their imagination. The audacity was almost impressive. Almost. Sunday morning, I woke up feeling like a detective who'd finally found the missing piece of a particularly puzzling case. I made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs Benedict with real hollandaise sauce, because when you're planning a campaign of justified revenge, you need to start with decent fuel and spread every piece of paperwork related to the Hawaii trip across my dining room table. Now here's something my darling daughter had apparently forgotten during her years of taking my organizational skills for granted. I don't do anything halfway. When Amber had casually mentioned wanting to visit Hawaii and Derek had started looking at resorts like a tourist reading postcards, I jumped in with both feet and a color-coded spreadsheet. See, being the helpful mom for 28 years had taught me to be thorough. Not just thorough, obsessively, methodically, backup plan for the backup plan thorough. Because when you're managing logistics for people who think planning ahead means buying groceries the same day they intend to cook them, you learn to cover every possible angle. The Grand Wiley Resort reservation, booked and paid for by me, confirmation number carefully filed, cancellation policy memorized. The rental car, my credit card, my name on the contract. Full insurance coverage because I'm not an amateur. The dinner reservations at Mama's Fish House, Merriman's, and that ridiculously expensive place on the beach where they charge $40 for fish that probably cost $3 to catch. All made by me, with my name as the primary contact. The snorkeling tour, the sunset dinner cruise, the couple's massage at the spa, even the helicopter tour that Derek had wanted to surprise Patricia with. Every single arrangement had been made by Haley Morrison. Not Amber Morrison or Derek Patterson or anybody else in their little conspiracy of convenience. I'd done this partly because I genuinely wanted to contribute to what I thought was a family vacation, and partly because Amber had been so overwhelmed with wedding planning that she'd barely had time to return my calls, let alone coordinate a complex 3-week itinerary. "Mom, you're so good at this stuff," she'd said. "Would you mind handling the Hawaii details? I'll pay you back when we get the wedding expenses sorted out." Of course, she'd never paid me back. The conversation about reimbursement had somehow evaporated into the ether, the way uncomfortable financial discussions tend to do in families where one person has money and the other person has assumptions about access to it. But I hadn't pushed the issue because I'd been too grateful to be included, too pleased to be useful, too desperate to maintain my position as the helpful mother rather than the burdensome obligation. But legally, financially, and practically speaking, I was the primary account holder for every aspect of this vacation. Every confirmation email sat in my inbox. Every credit card charge appeared on my statements. Every cancellation would require my authorization. I picked up my phone and started dialing. "Grand Wiley Resort, this is Jessica. How may I help you today?" "This is Haley Morrison. I need to cancel a reservation for next week." "Of course, Ms. Morrison. May I have your confirmation number?" 23 minutes later, I'd canceled the hotel reservation and recovered 72% of the payment thanks to their reasonable cancellation policy. The remaining 28% seemed like a small price to pay for the education I was about to provide my daughter about the consequences of deception. The rental car company was even more accommodating. Full refund, no questions asked, and they even thanked me for the advance notice. Apparently, honesty in business relationships is so rare that they were genuinely appreciative. The restaurant reservations required individual phone calls, but most of the hostesses were understanding about sudden family emergencies. The snorkeling tour company actually wished me well and said they hoped everything worked out. The spa was disappointed to lose our business but completely professional about the cancellation. By noon, I'd systematically dismantled every single arrangement that would have made their Hawaiian vacation possible, recovering most of my money in the process. But I wasn't finished, not even close. I opened my laptop and logged into the joint savings account I'd set up 3 years earlier, the account where I'd been depositing a portion of my Social Security and pension payments for family emergencies and shared expenses. The account that currently held $47,000 in carefully accumulated funds that Amber had access to for necessary expenses, but had never bothered to monitor the balance of. In her mind, it was just Mom's emergency fund, an inexhaustible resource that would always be there when needed, like Social Security or Medicare or unconditional maternal love. She'd use the debit card occasionally, always asking permission first, never checking the actual balance because she assumed it contained whatever modest amount was appropriate for an elderly woman's emergency fund. She had no idea that I'd been living well below my means for years, carefully saving money for future adventures, medical emergencies, or home improvements. She had no idea that being widowed and financially independent meant I could afford to be generous because I was being smart, not because I was desperate to buy affection. I transferred every penny to a new account at a different bank, an account with only my name on it, protected by new passwords and security questions that only I would know the answers to. Then I called the old bank and closed the original account entirely. When Amber stepped off that plane in Honolulu, expecting to use our money to salvage their vacation, she would discover that the card in her wallet was now connected to an account that no longer existed. Not temporarily frozen, not requiring authorization, but completely non-existent. For the first time in days, I smiled, and then I laughed. Actually laughed out loud in my kitchen, because sometimes the universe hands you the perfect opportunity to teach someone exactly what their deception is worth. Monday morning, I woke up feeling more energetic than I had in years. There's something deeply clarifying about decisive action, about finally matching your behavior to your principles, instead of constantly making excuses for other people's selfishness. I made myself French toast with real maple syrup and thick-cut bacon, the kind of indulgent breakfast I usually reserved for special occasions, and settled in to wait for the inevitable fireworks. The first call came at 6:47 a.m. Pacific time, which meant they'd landed, made it through customs, discovered that their hotel reservation didn't exist, and had spent approximately 23 minutes trying to figure out what had gone wrong before Amber's brain finally landed on the obvious culprit: me. "Mom!" Her voice was so shrill it could have shattered glass. "There's something wrong with our hotel reservation. They're saying it was canceled." "Oh my goodness," I said, adding just the right note of concern to my voice while admiring my perfectly manicured nails. "That's terrible, honey. What are you going to do?" I could hear Derek in the background, his voice rising with the kind of panic that comes when your elaborate deception starts falling apart in public. There were other voices, too, probably Patricia demanding explanations for why their luxury vacation had suddenly become a crisis management situation. "I don't know what happened," Amber continued, her voice cracking with stress. "The hotel says someone called yesterday to cancel everything. Derek is trying to find somewhere else to stay, but everything's either completely booked or incredibly expensive." I made appropriately sympathetic noises while mentally calculating just how expensive emergency hotel accommodations in Hawaii would be during peak tourist season. Supply and demand, darling. Basic economics. The cheapest place Derek could find is $800 a night, and that's for some tiny room without even an ocean view. "Mom, we might need to use the emergency account to cover this." "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need to do." There was a pause while Amber presumably tried to access the account, probably standing in some overpriced hotel lobby while other tourists watched the drama unfold. I imagined her confidently handing over the debit card, expecting it to solve all their problems with the magical efficiency that my money had always provided in the past. "Mom, the card isn't working. It says the account is closed." "That's very strange," I said thoughtfully. "Are you sure you're entering the number correctly?" "Sometimes those card readers can be finicky. I've used this card 100 times. Mom, what's going on? Did something happen to the account?" Behind her, I could hear Derek's voice getting louder, and Patricia's concerned questions, and the general chaos of three people discovering that their financial safety net had suddenly vanished. It was like listening to a very expensive episode of reality television, except I was both the audience and the producer. "I'm sure it's just some kind of technical problem," I said soothingly. "You know how computers can be. Banks have glitches all the time. Can you call them? We need this sorted out right now. We're stranded here with nowhere to stay and no way to pay for anything." "I'll see what I can do, honey." "Mom, this is serious. We're literally standing in a hotel lobby with our luggage, looking like idiots, while Derek tries to explain to the front desk why we don't have a reservation that we definitely made." "Well," I said carefully, "didn't you budget for the trip expenses before you left? Surely you have your own funds available for emergencies like this." The silence that followed was so long and complete that I briefly wondered if the call had dropped. When Amber finally spoke, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. We were counting on that account being available. Derek put everything he had saved into the wedding deposits, and my savings went toward the dress and all the other wedding expenses." "Ah. So they'd planned an expensive vacation they couldn't actually afford, counting on my money to make it possible. They'd excluded me from a trip I'd organized and paid for, then expected me to continue funding their deception. The audacity was breathtaking." "That sounds like a very difficult situation," I agreed. "Mom, you have to help us. Can you wire money or transfer funds or something? We can't just be stuck here." "I suppose I could arrange something," I said thoughtfully. "But I have to admit, I'm a bit confused about the whole situation." "What do you mean?" "Well, when you called last week to cancel the trip, I naturally assumed it was because you were having financial difficulties. But now it sounds like you never intended to cancel at all. The trip was just redirected." Another long pause. This one with a different quality. More careful, more calculated. "There was a miscommunication," Amber said slowly. "What kind of miscommunication exactly?" "Mom, can we talk about this later? We're kind of in crisis mode here, and there are people staring at us." "Of course you are." "Darling, I hope you figure something out. Give my regards to Patricia. I'm sure she's disappointed that her surprise vacation isn't going as smoothly as expected." I hung up before she could respond, then turned off my phone entirely. Let them figure out how to salvage their dream vacation using their own resources, their own credit cards, their own problem-solving skills. Meanwhile, I had travel plans of my own to make. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone had accumulated 23 missed calls from Amber, 6 from Derek, 3 from Patricia, and 1 very confused voicemail from someone who identified himself as a hotel manager asking me to please contact them about a payment dispute. I deleted all of them without listening to the full contents, because frankly, other people's poor planning was no longer my emergency. Instead, I spent Tuesday morning at Morrison Travel downtown, a charming little agency run by Janet Morrison. No relation, but she had excellent taste in surnames. I hadn't used a travel agent in years, but there was something delightfully old-fashioned and personal about having another human being help plan my escape from the debris of my daughter's deception. "I'd like to book a vacation," I told Janet, settling into the comfortable chair across from her desk. "Something tropical and luxurious. I'm celebrating my independence from ungrateful family members." Janet's eyes lit up with the kind of understanding that passes between women who've learned that life is too short to tolerate other people's nonsense. "What did you have in mind?" "The Maldives," I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came out. "I want overwater bungalows, complete pampering, and an experience so spectacular that when I tell people about it, they'll be genuinely envious instead of offering sympathy." The money I'd recovered from the Hawaii cancellations, combined with funds from my personal savings account, was more than enough for a truly magnificent solo vacation. Not just adequate, not just comfortable, but genuinely luxurious in a way I'd never allowed myself before. "When would you like to travel?" "As soon as possible, preferably before my daughter figures out how to use someone else's phone to continue harassing me." Janet laughed and started working her magic with airline schedules and resort availability. While she typed and clicked and made phone calls on my behalf, I sat in her sunny office, sipping complimentary tea and watching normal people go about their normal lives outside the window. There was something profoundly satisfying about making plans that included only my own preferences, my own schedule, my own comfort. No one to consult, no one to accommodate, no one to pretend I was grateful for whatever scraps of consideration they were willing to throw my way. "I've found something absolutely perfect," Janet announced, after 20 minutes of professional magic. Soneva Jani Resort in the Maldives. Oh. 5 nights in an overwater villa with a glass floor, private deck, and personal butler service. Seaplane transfers, all meals included, and spa treatments that will make you forget you ever had family drama. "When can I leave?" "Thursday morning, day after tomorrow." Sold. Thursday. While Amber and Derek were presumably still scrambling around Hawaii, trying to salvage their ruined vacation with maxed-out credit cards and whatever spare change they could find in their luggage, I'd be settling into my own private paradise, being pampered by people who were paid to make me happy instead of people who were related to me and therefore took my happiness for granted. I walked out of the travel agency feeling lighter than I had in months, clutching my confirmation papers like lottery tickets, which, in a way, they were. My reward for finally learning to value myself as much as I'd been valuing everyone else. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store and bought ingredients for a celebration dinner. Not a sad single-woman meal of soup and crackers, but a proper feast. Filet mignon, asparagus, a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a week. Because when you're celebrating your transformation from doormat to independent woman, you deserve more than leftovers. That evening, as I sat at my dining room table with my excellent dinner and my travel confirmations, I finally turned my phone back on to see what new developments had occurred in the continuing saga of my daughter's self-created crisis. The messages were impressively varied in their emotional range. Amber had progressed through panic, anger, bargaining, guilt-tripping, and what appeared to be a desperate attempt at emotional blackmail. Derek had contributed several messages that ranged from confused to demanding to vaguely threatening. Even Patricia had left a voicemail asking if there was some kind of family emergency that might explain the confusion about their accommodations. The most recent message was from Derek, and his tone had shifted into something I recognized from his teenage years, the particular whine he used when reality refused to cooperate with his expectations. "Haley, this is getting ridiculous. We're staying in a youth hostel and eating convenience store food. Amber has been crying for 2 days straight. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Please wire us enough money so we can salvage what's left of this trip and come home with some dignity." I read the message twice, marveling at his assumption that I owed them anything. The complete absence of apology, explanation, or acknowledgement of their deception. Just the entitled expectation that I would continue to solve problems I hadn't created. I typed back, "I thought the trip was canceled due to financial difficulties. I'm confused about why you're in Hawaii at all." Derek's response came within minutes. "You know exactly why we're here. Stop playing games and wire the money." "I'm not playing games," I replied. "I'm simply declining to fund a vacation I was excluded from. Enjoy the rest of your stay." Then I blocked all 3 of their numbers and turned my attention back to my travel preparations. Tomorrow I'd be flying to paradise. Tonight, I had packing to do. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Michigan weather that makes you grateful for heated cars and the promise of tropical destinations. I dressed carefully for travel, comfortable but stylish, because when you're embarking on a journey of personal liberation, you should look the part. My taxi driver was a chatty woman about my own age who was immediately enthusiastic when I told her I was heading to the Maldives for a solo vacation. "Good for you," she said, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "I keep telling my sister she should do something like that. She's always worried about what her kids will think, always putting everyone else first. Me, I tell her, honey, they're grown adults. If they can't handle you taking a vacation, that's their problem, not yours." I used to think the same way, I admitted. But I've recently learned that family approval isn't worth sacrificing your own happiness for, especially when the family in question doesn't seem particularly concerned about your happiness in return. Exactly. You raised them, you fed them, you worried about them for decades. Now it's your turn. At the airport, I treated myself to the business class lounge for the first time in my life. Not because I needed to save money. My finances were perfectly comfortable, thank you very much. But because I'd never felt like I deserved the luxury. Today, waiting for my flight to the literal opposite side of the world, it felt not just appropriate, but necessary. I ordered champagne at 10 a.m. because I could, because I was celebrating, because no one could tell me it was excessive or inappropriate or not worth the expense. The bubbles tickled my nose and made me feel giddy in the best possible way. While sipping my champagne and watching planes taxi on the runway, I finally unblocked my phone to check for any final messages from my family crisis. There were 4 new voicemails from Amber, and against my better judgment, I decided to listen to them. The first was pure panic. "Mom, it's me. Derek told me you blocked our numbers, but I'm hoping you'll still listen to voicemails. We're in serious trouble here. The youth hostel is horrible, and we can't afford to eat anywhere decent. Patricia is asking questions we can't answer, and Derek is barely speaking to me because he blames me for this whole mess. Please, please call me back." The second was angry. "Mom, this is cruel and you know it. We made one mistake, and you're punishing us like we committed some kind of crime. This isn't like you." The mother I know wouldn't leave her family stranded in a foreign place with no money. The third was bargaining. "Okay, I get it. You're mad about the Patricia thing. Maybe we should have told you the truth from the beginning, but we can talk about this when we get home. Right now, we just need enough money to fix this situation. We'll pay you back, I promise." The fourth was just crying. 2.5 minutes of my daughter sobbing into her phone, occasionally managing to gasp out words like sorry and please and help us between the tears. I deleted all 4 messages and put my phone away. The old me would have been devastated by those tears, would have immediately called back to apologize and arrange emergency funds. The old me would have felt guilty for causing pain, regardless of whether that pain was deserved. But the old me had enabled this behavior for 28 years, had trained my daughter to believe that tears and apologies could erase the consequences of deliberate deception. The old me had been so desperate to maintain family harmony that I'd consistently chosen peace over principles, comfort over respect. The new me understood that sometimes love means allowing people to experience the full weight of their choices. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to rescue someone from a crisis they created through their own selfishness. My flight was called, and I gathered my carry-on with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Whatever Amber was learning about herself and her priorities in that youth hostel, she was learning it without my financial intervention or emotional management. I was learning something too, that I was capable of protecting my own interests, of demanding respect rather than begging for consideration, of putting my own needs first without feeling guilty about it. As my plane lifted off from Detroit Metro, I pressed my face to the window and watched the ground fall away below. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, my daughter was probably composing another guilt-laden message or trying to figure out how to restore access to my money. But I was flying toward something infinitely better, a vacation designed around my happiness, funded by my resources, and planned according to my preferences. For the first time in decades, I was the protagonist of my own story instead of a supporting character in someone else's drama. And that felt absolutely magnificent. The Maldives exceeded every expectation I dared to have, which is saying something because my expectations had been pretty ambitious. My overwater villa at Sonevajani was the kind of place you see in magazines and assume must be heavily photoshopped because surely nowhere on earth is actually that beautiful. Turns out some places are exactly that spectacular, especially when you're experiencing them with a clear conscience and someone else's money. Well, technically my own money, but money that had been earmarked for funding other people's deception. My personal butler, Arjun, was the kind of professional who anticipated my needs before I knew I had them. When I mentioned enjoying morning coffee while watching the sunrise, he began appearing each dawn with perfectly prepared espresso and fresh pastries arranged on fine china. When I admired the resort's infinity pool, he discreetly arranged for private swimming sessions during the most peaceful hours, when the water was like glass and the only sounds were gentle waves and distant birds. For 5 glorious days, I lived like the main character in my own story instead of a supporting player in someone else's drama. I snorkeled among coral reefs that looked like underwater gardens, enjoyed spa treatments that made my 68-year-old body feel like it belonged to someone decades younger, and dined on cuisine that transformed simple ingredients into works of art. But the real luxury wasn't the accommodations or the service. it was the silence. No phone calls demanding explanations for my unreasonable behavior. No guilt trips disguised as family concern. No one expecting me to sacrifice my comfort for their convenience while acting like I should be grateful for the privilege. Every morning, I woke up in my overwater villa and thought about my daughter and her co-conspirators, probably still scrambling around Hawaii trying to figure out how to afford basic necessities. I should have felt guilty about their situation. The old me would have been consumed with worry, imagining them suffering while I lounged in paradise. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. They were adults who had made adult decisions, and they were experiencing adult consequences. My job as a mother hadn't been to shield them from reality indefinitely. It had been to raise them to handle reality competently. If they couldn't handle the fallout from their own deception, that was a failure of character, not parenting. On my third day, while enjoying a massage that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month, I got a text from an unknown number. Amber had obviously borrowed someone's phone, because persistence is apparently a family trait, even when it's misdirected. "Mom, we're sleeping on the beach because we can't afford hostels anymore. Please help us." I read it twice, then showed it to my masseuse, who made sympathetic clucking sounds while working a particularly stubborn knot out of my shoulder. "Family troubles?" she asked in her lovely Maldivian accent. "Family learning opportunities," I corrected. "Sometimes the best education is the most expensive." I deleted the message without responding and asked for extra time on the hot stone treatment. After all, relaxation is serious business, and I was finally taking it seriously. On my final evening, as I sat on my deck watching the sunset paint the sky in shades that would make a professional artist weep with envy, I received another text from yet another unknown number. "Mom, we're flying home tomorrow. We need to talk." I read it while sipping champagne that probably cost more than their entire youth hostel experience. Then typed back, "Have a safe flight. I'll be back Sunday." The response came immediately. "Where are you?" "Paradise," I replied, then turned off my phone and returned my attention to the sunset. The flight home felt different from the journey out. I wasn't running away anymore. I was returning with purpose and a magnificent tan. During the long hours over the Pacific, I had time to think about what came next, and it occurred to me that this experience had been more than just a vacation. It had been a masterclass in self-respect. I would no longer be the emergency fund that never required repayment, or the emotional support system that functioned exclusively in one direction. If Amber wanted a relationship with me moving forward, it would be as equals, built on mutual respect rather than my desperate gratitude for whatever attention she was willing to provide. When my taxi pulled into my driveway, Mrs. Henderson was collecting her mail and practically bounced over to greet me. "Haley, you look absolutely radiant. How was your trip?" "Transformative," I said honestly, pulling my suitcase from the trunk. "I highly recommend solo travel for women our age. The world is much more welcoming than we've been led to believe. I might just take that advice. My daughter's always saying I should get out more, see the world. The key," I said, unlocking my front door, "is to see it on your own terms, not as someone else's afterthought." Inside my house, everything was exactly as I'd left it, yet somehow the space felt different. More definitively mine, perhaps. Like a house where the owner had learned to value herself appropriately. I unpacked slowly, savoring the process of putting away clothes that smelled like tropical flowers and ocean air, physical evidence of my successful rebellion against family martyrdom. My answering machine was blinking with 23 new messages, which seemed like exactly the right number for a family crisis that had lasted 5 days without my intervention. I ignored it completely and made myself a proper cup of tea instead. The doorbell rang at 6:23 p.m., which was either excellent timing or very poor timing, depending on your perspective. Through the peephole, I saw Amber standing on my porch, looking significantly thinner than when I'd last seen her and considerably less sure of herself. No Derek, no Patricia, just my daughter holding a pathetic bouquet of grocery store flowers that had clearly seen better days. I opened the door but didn't immediately invite her in. Sometimes body language speaks louder than words, and I wanted to establish the new parameters of our relationship from the very beginning. Hello, Amber? Mom. Her voice was smaller than usual, uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. Can we talk? I stepped aside to let her enter, noticing how she glanced around my living room as if seeing it for the first time. Which, in a way, she probably was. When had she last visited without wanting something? When had she last paid attention to the space where I lived my actual life? How was Hawaii? I asked pleasantly, settling into my favorite chair and gesturing for her to take the couch. Amber perched on the edge of the sofa cushions like a bird ready to take flight, still clutching her sad flowers. It was awful, Mom. You know it was awful. I'm sorry to hear that. What made it so unpleasant? She stared at me for a long moment, clearly searching for the anger and guilt she'd expected to find. When she didn't find either, her shoulders sagged in a way that suggested she was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what had changed between us. We couldn't afford anything. The hotels, the restaurants, even basic food was ridiculously expensive. We ended up sleeping in a hostel dormitory with college kids who partied until 4 a.m. Derek and I fought constantly because we were stressed and exhausted and completely out of money. That does sound challenging, I said, accepting the flowers and setting them on the coffee table without comment. Patricia kept asking questions about why our reservations had been canceled and why we didn't have access to emergency funds. Derek finally had to tell her the truth about the situation. What situation would that be? Amber's face flushed. About how the trip had been arranged differently than we'd originally planned. Differently how? Mom, you know what I mean. I'm afraid I don't. Could you be more specific? She shifted uncomfortably, clearly hoping I would fill in the blanks and spare her the humiliation of explaining her own deception. When I didn't, she finally spoke. About how we'd invited Patricia instead of you, and how Derek had exaggerated about your health issues. Exaggerated, I repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting word choice. I'd call inventing an entire medical condition that required me to miss a vacation I'd planned and paid for something closer to lying. But perhaps that's just a generational difference in vocabulary. Look, I know Derek shouldn't have said those things about you being sick, but we thought it would be easier than explaining the real reason. Which was? Mom, you have to understand. Patricia was going through such a hard time after her divorce, and Derek really wanted to do something special for her. We thought this could be like a healing experience for their relationship. I sipped my tea and waited for her to continue, employing a technique I'd learned from watching professional interrogators on crime shows. Sometimes, silence is the most effective way to get people to reveal exactly how much they don't understand about their own behavior. We didn't think you'd mind that much, she continued, her voice getting smaller. I mean, you travel all the time, and you're always so understanding about family situations. When do I travel all the time, Amber? She blinked. You went to that conference last year. That was a library convention for work. Hardly a pleasure trip. And you visited Aunt Linda in Florida when she was recovering from surgery, also not exactly a vacation. But you seem like someone who does things, who goes places. It was a fascinating glimpse into how little my own daughter knew about my actual life. In her mind, I was some kind of perpetually busy social butterfly instead of a recently retired woman who spent most of her time reading, gardening, and looking forward to the occasional family gathering where I wasn't treated like an inconvenience. Amber, when's the last time I took a real vacation? A trip purely for my own enjoyment? She was quiet for a long moment. I can't remember. The Maldives, I said. Last week. That was my first pleasure trip in over 5 years. The Maldives? Amber's voice cracked slightly. You went to the Maldives? I did. It was spectacular. Overwater villa, personal butler, spa treatments that made me feel 30 years younger. I highly recommend it, though I suspect it's somewhat outside your current budget range. Her eyes filled with tears, the same manipulation tactic that had been working on me for nearly 3 decades. But something interesting happened this time. Instead of feeling guilty about her distress, I found myself studying her reaction with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. Mom, I'm so sorry, she gasped, launching into the full-body sobs I remembered from her childhood tantrums. I know we messed up terribly, but we never meant to hurt you. We thought you wouldn't mind because you're always so generous and understanding. I watched without moving to comfort her. a decision that felt revolutionary. For 28 years, Amber's tears had been my Pavlovian trigger to fix whatever was wrong, regardless of whether I'd caused the problem or whether fixing it was actually in her best interest. "When you say you thought I wouldn't mind," I said calmly, "what exactly did you think I wouldn't mind? Being lied to? Being excluded from a vacation I'd organized? Having fictional medical conditions attributed to me? Or just being treated like my feelings don't matter? When you put it like that, it sounds horrible. How would you put it?" She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture that reminded me she was still. In many ways, the child who'd always expected her problems to be solved by someone else. We thought of it as family helping family, like you were helping Derek do something nice for his mom. By letting him pretend my generosity was his idea while making me the villain in a story about fake health problems. It wasn't supposed to be like that. We were going to tell you eventually, after the trip, and we were going to make it up to you somehow. How exactly? We hadn't figured that part out yet. I stood up and walked to my bookshelf, where I'd placed the small carved dolphin I'd bought in the Maldives, a reminder of what life looked like when I stopped prioritizing other people's comfort over my own dignity. "Amber, let me ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. When's the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not because you needed something, not because there was a family obligation, but because you genuinely wanted to know about my life." The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. "When's the last time you asked about my interests, my health, my opinions about anything that didn't directly affect you?" More silence. "When's the last time you treated me like a person whose thoughts and feelings mattered as much as your own?" "Mom, that's not fair. You're my mother, it's different." "How is it different?" Because you're supposed to take care of me. That's what mothers do." There it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that had been poisoning our relationship for years. In Amber's mind, being my daughter gave her permanent access to my resources and unconditional forgiveness for her behavior, while requiring nothing from her in return except the bare minimum of acknowledgement that I existed. "You're 28 years old, Amber. You have a college degree, a good job, and a fiancé. At what point did you imagine the taking care of would become reciprocal?" I don't know what you mean. I mean, when were you planning to start considering my needs the way I've always considered yours? When were you going to start contributing to my happiness instead of just taking from it?" Her tears had stopped, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like confusion. "But I do consider your needs. I invite you to family events. I call you on holidays. You invite me to events where I'm treated like an obligation that has to be accommodated. You call me on holidays because social convention requires it. When have you ever done something purely for my pleasure, without any benefit to yourself? This is ridiculous. Every mother helps their children. That's what being a parent means. Help, yes. But children are supposed to help their parents too. Especially adult children. They're supposed to consider their parents' feelings, treat them with courtesy, include them in decisions that affect them. You're being impossible." I returned to my chair, feeling suddenly tired. Not defeated, just weary of explaining basic human decency to my own daughter. "Amber, did you ever wonder how I could afford a spontaneous luxury vacation to the Maldives right after you assumed you'd left me financially devastated?" She paused her emotional display, looking genuinely confused. I figured you had some emergency savings somewhere." "I do. I have a comfortable retirement income, substantial personal savings, and more financial independence than you've ever bothered to learn about. I don't need your charity or your sporadic attention." "Then why have you been helping us financially all these years?" "Because I wanted to. Because I thought it would bring us closer together. Because I hoped that generosity would be appreciated and reciprocated in ways that didn't involve money. It is appreciated." "No, Amber, it's expected. There's a significant difference." She sank back onto the sofa, looking genuinely bewildered. "I don't understand what you want from me. I want you to be curious about my life. I want you to consider my feelings before making decisions that affect me. I want you to treat me like someone whose company you enjoy rather than someone whose resources you need." "But that's not, She struggled with the words, and I realized that she'd never thought about our relationship from my perspective. Ever. "Here's what's going to change," I said. settling back into my chair with the calm authority of someone who'd finally learned to value herself appropriately. I won't be providing any more financial assistance. You and Derek are adults with good incomes, and you can fund your own lifestyle choices. Mom, I won't be available for last-minute babysitting, emergency favors, or crisis management unless you're equally available for my needs. Reciprocity, Amber. It's not a dirty word. What needs? You never ask for anything. Because I learned not to. Because every time I had a problem or wanted something, I was made to feel like I was being unreasonably demanding. But that's changing too. The color was slowly draining from Amber's face as she began to understand that this wasn't a temporary tantrum that could be resolved with sufficient tears and apologies. This was a fundamental restructuring of our relationship. You can't just cut me off completely. I'm your daughter, and you'll always be my daughter. But being my daughter doesn't entitle you to unlimited access to my resources while contributing nothing in return. Love isn't a one-way transaction, regardless of what you've been led to believe. She stood up abruptly, her voice rising with panic. This is insane. Every family helps each other out. That's what families do. Help, yes. Take advantage of, no. There's a difference between family support and family exploitation, and you've been firmly in exploitation territory for years. I don't exploit you. You lied to your future mother-in-law about my health to justify excluding me from a trip I'd planned and paid for. You've accessed my bank account for 3 years without ever asking about my own financial needs or goals. You call me when you want something and ignore me when you don't. How would you define exploitation? I love you, Mom. That's different from taking advantage. Is it? Because love without respect feels remarkably similar to being used. Amber began pacing my small living room, her agitation growing as the reality of changed circumstances began to sink in. So what are you saying? That you're cutting me off? That you don't want a relationship with me anymore? I'm saying I want a different relationship. One where my feelings matter as much as yours. Where my comfort isn't automatically sacrificed for your convenience. Where you contribute to my life instead of just extracting from it. I do contribute. I invite you to events. I include you in family plans. You invite me to events where I'm seated next to garbage cans. You include me in family plans that involve lying about my health and excluding me from activities I've organized. Your version of inclusion feels remarkably similar to exclusion with extra steps. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. For the first time in our relationship, I'm prioritizing my own well-being instead of managing your emotions. Fine, she exploded, tears streaming down her face. You want to know the truth? The real reason we didn't want you on the trip? Please, enlighten me. Because you're boring, okay? You ask a million questions about everything. You worry about money constantly. You always want to plan every minute of every day. Derek said traveling with you would be like traveling with his accountant. Except less fun. There it was. The truth I'd suspected but had been too afraid to hear directly. In their minds, I wasn't just old and inconvenient. I was fundamentally uninteresting, someone whose company was a burden to be endured rather than enjoyed. Thank you for your honesty, I said calmly. That's actually very helpful information. I didn't mean, oh, but you did mean it. And now I know exactly how my own daughter sees me, as someone too boring to vacation with, too demanding to appreciate, too inconvenient to treat with basic respect. Mom, I was angry. I didn't mean those things. You meant every word. And the fact that you said them when you were angry just means they're closer to how you really feel than anything you say when you want something from me. She collapsed back onto the sofa, sobbing harder now. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, Amber. You can only learn from it. What does that mean? It means that for the first time in your life, you're going to experience the actual consequences of treating people badly. It means that your boring, demanding, inconvenient mother is going to start acting accordingly. You're punishing me. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference, though I understand why you might have trouble distinguishing between the two. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, and for a moment I saw the little girl she'd been before entitlement and selfishness had calcified into her default personality. I really am sorry, Mom. I know we hurt you, and I know it was wrong. I believe you're sorry that your deception had consequences. I'm less convinced that you're sorry about the deception itself. That's not true, isn't it? If everything had gone according to plan, if I'd never found out about Patricia, if the vacation had been wonderful, if you'd successfully used my money to fund Derek's generosity toward his mother, would you be apologizing now? She was quiet for a long moment. Probably not, she finally whispered. At least you're being honest about that. So what happens now? Do we just not have a relationship anymore? We have the relationship you've been building for years. One where I'm useful when you need something and invisible when you don't. The only difference is that now I'm choosing to be invisible all the time. That's not what I want. It's what you've been training me to accept. I'm simply taking your lessons to their logical conclusion. Amber left that evening without the reconciliation she'd expected, without the immediate forgiveness she'd taken for granted, and definitely without renewed access to my financial resources. She tried several different approaches before giving up. More tears, angry accusations about my selfishness, and finally, a desperate attempt to bargain her way back into my good graces by promising to do better in some vague, unspecified way. I remained consistent throughout her emotional performance. Warm, but boundaried. Loving, but not automatically accommodating. It was exhausting, actually, resisting decades of programmed responses to her distress, but also oddly liberating. Over the following weeks, she tried various tactics to restore the status quo. Angry phone calls where she accused me of abandoning family when family needed help most. Guilt-laden texts about wedding expenses and how stressed she was about planning everything without my assistance. Even a few half-hearted attempts at genuine conversation, though those felt stilted and uncertain, like someone trying to speak a foreign language they'd never bothered to learn properly. I remained politely unavailable. Not cruel, not punishing, just unavailable in the way I'd been trained to be available for 28 years. Derek called once, attempting to negotiate on Amber's behalf with the kind of entitled confidence that suggested he genuinely believed I was being unreasonable. "Haley, look, we get it. You're upset. But this has gone on long enough. Amber's really struggling with the wedding planning, and she needs her mother right now. Then she should probably start treating her mother like someone whose support is valuable rather than someone whose resources are automatic. We're not bad people," he said, sounding genuinely confused by my unwillingness to resume my role as the family ATM. "We just made a mistake. You made a series of calculated decisions that showed complete disregard for my feelings and dignity. Actions have consequences, Derek, even when the actions are taken by people who don't consider themselves bad. So you're never going to help us again? You're going to hold one mistake against us forever? I'm never going to be taken for granted again. If you want my help in the future, you'll need to earn it through consistent respect and consideration." Novel concept, I know. The breakthrough came exactly 6 weeks and 3 days after our initial confrontation. I know the timeline precisely because I'd been tracking it, curious to see how long it would take for genuine change to occur versus superficial apology. Amber appeared at my door on a Thursday evening, not with flowers or tears or dramatic declarations, but with a simple, unprecedented request. "Mom, can you teach me how you planned that Maldives trip? I mean, actually teach me, not just do it for me." I studied her face carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives. Instead, I found something I hadn't seen in years, genuine curiosity about my capabilities. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I realized something while Derek and I were trying to plan our honeymoon. I don't actually know how to do any of this stuff. I don't know how to research destinations, compare prices, understand cancellation policies, or manage travel logistics. I've been relying on other people, mostly you, to handle complicated things for me, and I never learned to do them myself. And now you want to learn? I want to understand how you managed to plan such an incredible vacation on such short notice. I want to know how you figured out the logistics, how you found that resort, how you made it all work so perfectly." We spent that evening at my kitchen table, going through travel websites and budget spreadsheets and airline policies. Amber asked real questions, not perfunctory ones designed to flatter me into doing the work myself, but genuine inquiries about currency exchange rates and travel insurance and jet lag management. "You're really good at this," she said about an hour into our session, sounding genuinely surprised. "I've had a lot of practice taking care of myself. I never thought about that before. about you having to figure all this stuff out on your own. I mean, I always just assumed you knew how to do everything automatically. It wasn't a dramatic apology or a complete personality transformation, but it was a beginning. The first time she'd shown interest in my skills rather than just my resources. The first time she'd acknowledged that I had capabilities worth learning from. Slowly, over the following months, our relationship began to reshape itself around entirely different principles. Amber started calling with genuine curiosity about my book club, my volunteer work at the animal shelter, my gardening projects. She invited me to dinner not because obligations required it, but because she discovered I was actually interesting company when treated as a person rather than a service provider. We never traveled together again. When she asked why during one of our slowly improving conversations, I smiled and said, "Because you once told Derek I was too boring to vacation with. I'm respecting your assessment and planning my trips accordingly." She had the grace to blush deeply and the wisdom not to argue. Our relationship now is smaller than it once was, but infinitely more honest. Amber manages her own finances and doesn't assume access to mine. I offer help when I choose to, not when it's demanded. Most importantly, she learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just emotional manipulation with a prettier name. I never regretted a single day of that perfect vacation in the Maldives. Every sunset over the lagoon, every spa treatment, every moment of peace and luxury was worth the temporary discomfort of watching my daughter learn to treat me like a human being rather than a renewable resource. And Patricia? She still sends me Christmas cards every year, apparently still grateful for my gracious understanding about the Hawaii situation. I never corrected her misconceptions about my health or my role in the trip's cancellation. Some lessons are best learned through experience rather than explanation. And some people are perfectly happy living in their own version of reality. Besides, her thank you notes are actually quite touching. It's nice to be appreciated, even when the appreciation is based on a complete misunderstanding of what actually happened.